Ее же все критикуют. Часть эта оговорка налоговая, она же как раз элемент этой истории, просто вставлен в искусство.
Ну вот, да, правильно.
Спасибо большое. Добрый день, дамы и господа.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank everyone who was able to join us in this hall this morning, as we are going to discuss very important issues. And I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this event for being able to gather together such a rich panel session today. Well, we are going to discuss today the development of the global tax regulation. And we are going to speak about the trans-border adjustment mechanisms when supplying and shipping commodities trans-border. But all in all, I believe that if we take a principal perspective on this issue, well, the main topic of this meeting, and should I say the main theme of the supranational regulation, it is the quality changes, improvement in this globalized world we have been living for quite a number of years already, as well as the understanding that international institutions, the global ones, be it global institutions or regional institutions, are playing ever more important role, and the economic actors and operators are increasingly depend on those decisions which are made by joint organizations. What we are witnessing today is the formation of new type of relations, because many events in the world today are no longer local events. This applies to different industries. Let's remember how the emergency of the container vessel in the Suez Channel impacted the global economy. Although you could think that this is just an isolated incident or some kind of isolated logistical issue which happened in just one region of the world. And today, what has happened in the Guinea, those political turmoil and the national revolution is impacting raw commodity markets. So what is being offered today? Those solutions which will be corporate solutions which will be impacting all the stakeholders of this process are becoming the most important aspect of international policies. And on the separate note, I would like to mention digitalization in the world today, because most of our session will be dedicated to the changes in digital companies and changes thereof. And I think that this global digitalization phenomena is a huge opportunity for many actors, including the national regulators. But on the other hand, digitalization is a big challenge to how these regulators are going to act, and just how soon and adapt they'll be to making decisions to take advantage of this global digitalization. Yet another aspect we're going to touch upon today would be cross-border carbon adjustment. And it's a new thing which I consider somewhat local between the EU as an importer and suppliers of the commodities, because anyway it's a very important precedent, as it shows how and in what way the possible impacts on the market situation of companies are connected to their competitive stance, and how it is connected to the general modeling and forecasting of economic processes in commodities markets. And due to natural reasons, these markets have a huge inertia. I mean, because you have to produce, you have to have a certain infrastructure, and some long-term solutions which may be accepted without some good elaborations will be costly in the end. And this is also a very, very challenging issue today. I would like to begin our session today by providing the floor to Pascal Senaman, the director of the Center of the Tax Policies and Administration of the OECD. Pascal, the floor is yours.
Siva, good morning to you all. So I will speak English, so if you need to put the headphones. I'm extremely happy to be here, so I would like to thank Alexei Sazonov for the invitation, and very happy to be in Moscow meeting a number of friends. Russia is a member of the tax work at the OECD. You are a member of the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information, which is the mechanism we've put in place to put an end to bank secrecy. Russia is a very active member of the Forum on Tax Administration. Daniel Yegorov is very active in the forum, and Russia is an active member of the inclusive framework for BEPS implementation. All that to say that you are fully participating on an equal footing, like a full member of the tax work at the OECD. So what's going on? I think I have just a few minutes to give you a sketch of the current debate on the change of international tax rules. And this current debate is pretty high profile. There will be, at the end of the month, literally the 8th of October, a meeting of the inclusive framework. There are 140 members of the inclusive framework to agree a new set of rules. They already did so on the 1st of July, and that's a historic agreement that the G20 finance ministers welcomed in Venice. But this agreement will be finalized on the 8th of October to be presented to the G20 finance ministers the following week, and to the G20 leaders at the end of October, on the 31st of October at the G20 summit. I'm saying that because this is not technical tax stuff for tax nerds. This is highly political agenda to change international tax rules. So why so, and what are we doing, and what are the next steps? International tax rules are very much limited to tax treaties which aim to eliminate double taxation. Russia has a significant treaty network. There are 3,500 tax treaties in the world, and everything went fine, except that these rules, which fundamentally date back to a model which is 1 century old, this rule has become more and more irrelevant over time. And the global financial crisis in 2008 was kind of the wake-up call that these rules didn't fit globalization. Globalization had resulted in business being able to move their assets, to move their people, to even more easily move their profits to low-tax jurisdictions. And tax treaties were good at eliminating double taxation, but they almost facilitated double non-taxation. So there was a reaction of tax administrations, a reaction of governments, a reaction of the people saying there is something wrong. the large multinational companies are able to pay nothing or hardly anything by putting their profit in tax havens, and we need to fix it. At the OECD, working with the G20, and I do remember the G20 presidency in Russia in 2013, with President Putin saying, what's happening in tax, it's history, and is a fundamental change. And that's where, in Moscow and in St. Petersburg in 2013, we launched a big project, which we called BEPS, for base erosion and profit shifting. The idea was to say these tax treaties were good for bilateral relationship, but the world now is really global. The economy is global. The businesses are global. And we need global rules to address this challenge. Otherwise, all the companies will put all their profits in tax havens and all the countries will lose corporate income tax. So we did the BEPS project for a couple of years, and we delivered a set of rules in 2015, and we tried to fix transfer pricing, tax treaties, and a number of elements. Countries decided to implement, and we had this new group, the inclusive framework to implement BEPS, but countries said, we are still facing a couple of challenges. One challenge is the fact that we have digitalization. Digitalization means that you have digital players. The largest companies in the world today are digital players, search engines or social networks or service providers. And these players can make a lot of money from your country without even being physically present in the country. Which means that the tax administration doesn't get to tax them. Because the rule, which is 1 century old, is a country can tax a company only where there is a physical presence of the company in the country. So a number of countries said, that's not fair. We cannot get to tax these highly profitable companies. We need to do something. And they couldn't do anything, because precisely tax treaties prevented them from taxing these companies, because tax treaties said, unless there is a physical presence, you cannot tax. So countries were frustrated, and they said, we need to change the rules. So they turned to the OECD, to the inclusive framework, and said, let's change the rules. But on the other hand, you had other countries say, we cannot target the changes to a set of companies, because it's the whole economy which is digitalizing. And therefore, if we change the rules, we need to change the rules for all the companies, because it's not only the digitalization which is an issue. It's also the fact that the value is now created on intangible property, and intangible property can be easily shifted. So we need to better share the profits made by companies on intangible property. We need to better share the rent among countries. And that idea emerged as what we now call Pillar 1. Pillar 1 is about saying we need a new nexus. We need to allow countries to tax companies even where there is no physical presence. But we also need to share, through a formula, between 20 and 30%, part of the rent of these highly profitable companies. And this excess return, this rent, will be shared with the market jurisdictions, where the clients are, where you click on the search engine and you generate advertisement. The advertisement may be booked in Ireland. The profit should go back to Russia, at least part of it. That's the philosophy of Pillar 1. To do so, you need to have an agreement of all the countries, and we've been negotiating for the past 4 years this agreement. There have been ups and downs, but because now this is a priority of most countries, including the United States of America, where many of these companies are located, we have been able, since March, to make tremendous progress, and in July, to agree on a new nexus, where there is profit derived from a country for more than 1 million euros, then the company will be taxable in the country. And 20 to 30% of the rent of these companies will be allocated to the market based on revenue. There will be one big exception, and I think in this forum it's important to say it. Extractive industries will not be there. But all the companies, the largest companies, the winners of globalization, outside financial industry and extractives, where they make more than 20 billion euros of turnover, and when they have a profitability above 10%, they will be in scope, and that represents more than 100 billion euros of profit which will shift from one country to another. That's pillar one. Pillar two is about another concern, in spite of the progress on BEPS, which are real, which have allowed tax administrations to increase the effective tax rate on companies. We still have an issue with companies able, multinational companies, able to locate part of their profits to very low tax jurisdictions or zero tax jurisdictions. And we need to put an end to that, because that triggers a race to the bottom, an endless tax competition, or tax competition which will end where there is no longer corporate income tax. And all the countries need corporate income tax. It's only 10% of the revenue, but still it's significant money, including in Russia. So what countries have said is, let's go beyond what was done in BEPS. Let's do a global minimum tax. And the global minimum tax idea is to say, if you have a Russian company which operates abroad, normally you will not tax the profit made abroad because other countries will tax it. That's why you don't tax it. And you exempt the dividends when they are paid in Russia. Except that more and more often companies have located their profit not in France where they do the business, not in Germany where they sell their stuff, not in China where they have a manufacturer, but they have located their profit in Singapore and in other jurisdictions where there is hardly any taxation. And the idea is to say, we need to protect tax administrations, tax revenues, like Russian and others, from this race to the bottom. We should agree a global minimum tax of at least 15%. So whatever a company does tomorrow, it will be taxed of at least 15% on its foreign source income. Either because Russia will say, oh, your profit was in, I take a random country, Cyprus, and we'll take the difference between 0 in Cyprus and 15. Or, if you see a foreign company doing business in Russia, and this foreign company is a Cayman company, which is taxed at 0, you will be able to take 15% in Russia. So we are organizing this safety net. This is pillar 2. Now, on pillar 2, we have an agreement, but not yet finalized. We need to decide on the rate. I said at least 15%. We'll see what the agreement is at the end of the month. We tend to think that it will be 15%. Which is significant. It's better than 0 or 5 or 6, which is the current rate. And we also need to provide for an exemption. We need to leave some room of maneuver for countries to give some tax incentives, limited tax incentives, but where there is real activity, people, assets, we should have this. So this package of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 has been negotiated for almost 4 years now, and it is being finalized nowadays. I spent part of the day yesterday in my hotel room doing Zoom meetings because we've negotiated that with Zoom to finalize the meeting, the agreement. But, as I said, the finance ministers have already endorsed this structure, and things are going to happen. The next steps, and I close with that, the next steps, once the agreement is concluded in October with Pillar 1, and I should have added that Pillar 1 will provide tax certainty for companies, the real elimination of double taxation in the case of disputes. Once we have finalized this agreement, we'll develop instruments to implement. A multilateral convention that the whole 140 countries will have to ratify. And we're extremely ambitious. This instrument should be ready in the first quarter of 22 to be ratified in the course of the year. So things are going to move very fast because there is urgency to fix that. Governments need revenue, especially after the COVID crisis. And we'll develop domestic legislation models for the implementation of Pillar 2, and they will be ready by the end of November. So something which is extremely fast, so that in 23 we can have an implementation of what is a completely new international framework. It adds to the existing one, but it will change the dynamic, and it should put an end to the use of tax havens in the world. It should increase tax cooperation. Tax corporations will play a key role in exchanging information, in making sure that all that goes smoothly, and we are confident that this will happen, and we're very happy that this will happen with the support of Russia. Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Could I ask you one question, please? Given your, as far as I know, you have a vast experience of government service, so it looks like you're very well organized in developing and implementation these sort of regulations. But from the business point of view, how comfortable business is with, especially with Pillar 2, given that Pillar 1 means reallocation of taxes and Pillar 2 means taking the extra tax. So have you asked them, and what is their point? I mean, the biggest taxpayers.
So that's a good question. I mean, if you ask a taxpayer, would you like to pay more taxes? I guess the poll will probably give 99.99% of no, right? But
100.
if, because you have one not listening, so he doesn't respond. Now, if you ask strategic people in business, not only the tax people who do their job, which is to minimize the tax bill, but if you say, what do we want? Do we want a stable system where you know how much tax you will pay, you know the rules, and you have tax certainty? Or we don't fix the system. The system is broken, doesn't work. And governments are tired of that. And you have a global financial crisis. You mentioned geopolitical tensions in your introduction. So it's the time where governments want to show that they are sovereign, that they can do what they want. Oh, you foreign companies, you are located in low tax jurisdictions, we're going to take withholding taxes. We're going to invent new taxes. You're an American digital company, you will suffer a digital service tax. They don't like it. They'd rather have a globally agreed solution. If you are too aggressive in the tax planning using low tax jurisdictions, you can do it, but at some point countries will enact pretty harsh CFC legislation. These are the anti-abuse legislation to make sure that you will pay taxes. They can be extremely hard, and if they are not well combined, if you don't have one model rule, if you don't have tax administrations talking to each other, which is what we are going to organize with Pillar 2, you have double taxation. So the choice is not between the current situation, which is kind of a golden age. Tax administrations do what they can, but what you do is legal, so they cannot really challenge it because the rules are broken. So golden age, you do what you want, you reduce the tax burden, nobody bothers you. But there is no status quo. This situation, this time is over. The new time is either an international agreement with a multilateral implementation, which will be resulting in a higher level of tax, but more tax certainty, more tax cooperation. Only one country-by-country reporting, filing, and not 140 different filings. So lesser compliance cost and tax certainty, that's one option. The other option is chaos. Welcome to chaos if you don't want a global solution. You will face still a good offer from tax havens, but the countries which tax will just be extremely harsh on everybody, not coordinated, and I think it really looks bad for investment. So I think business has to think this. Now, in the implementation, the design of the rule, we have for the past 4 years massively consulted, and I must say that a large number of businesses have been very constructive in the comments. They are nervous, they find problems. I love finding solutions. And tax lawyers very often love finding problems, but that's life, right? And it's good to find the problems before they occur. So there will be technical consultation, but on the sense of direction, I think there is a big writing on the wall. The rules have to change, the rules are changing, and tomorrow the rule will be changed.
Thank you. Теперь я хотел бы передать слово.
And that I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker. Alexei Sazonov, State Secretary, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation. And having heard what Pascal said, certainly we try to apply that to the Russian situation. I do think that Alexei is the best man to do that. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Pascal for receiving our invitation despite the tight pandemic restrictions, and we hope that it would be a good tradition that Pascal comes to our financial forum every year in order to tell us more about the international taxation. That's great. Pascal, thank you so much for coming. And speaking about the attitude of the Russian Federation towards Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, certainly we support that very much. Speaking about Pillar 1, in our opinion, indirect taxation, this is a kind of a breakthrough which can be compared to taking a man to the space, where the first space launch, because it would be the first tax base which would be determined at the supranational level, internationally. And this is totally unprecedented in the area of taxation. The Russian Federation not only welcomes that, but tries as much as it can to contribute to the development of that mechanism. Pillar 1, as Pascal correctly said, was driven by the fact that over the last several decades, a number of international groupings emerged which had huge financial and human assets. They would use advanced tools to optimize the taxation and tax administration of every country. Could not fight against these tools and mechanisms alone. Because if one tax administration in one country tried to tighten the screws, then this international company would just move its business to another tax administration, and usually that would totally defeat any restrictive measures which this or that country would impose. Once we speak about the international efforts, once the tax administration joined the efforts, the response to the tax administration measures could be quite effective and proportionate. Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are aimed and targeted against the most blatant tax optimization tools. As I said, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, this is about the tax base that would be determined internationally, and every country would contribute to that and would get part of its rent. Russia certainly would benefit from that because we have huge domestic consumption and input flows. Therefore, the use of such mechanism as Pillar 1, Russia would only benefit. As for the Pillar 2, this is another breakthrough because for the first time the tax administration locally would get an opportunity to tax the profit of a consolidated group when the company is located, is incorporated not only where its parent company is, but we may trace the whole value chain. If the parent company sees that the taxation level is below 15%, as a result of tax administration tools, then the tax administration of the parent company would be entitled to take that tax and to raise it to 15%. That's another precedent, which is totally unique for the history of taxation. And now that Pascal is the one who masterminded, was the one who was behind all these tools, such as Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. He's a real genius. Pascal, we really respect you, and thank you so much for getting access to the profits generated by the international companies. That's in a nutshell. We very much appreciate Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Thank you so much. I will not go into further details and pass the floor to next speakers. Thank you so much. Alexei, thank you so much. I have a question. This advantage that we expect for Russia, can we evaluate that money-wise? Well, when Pascal presents the final documents,
then along with the colleagues from the tax authority will appreciate that and evaluate that, but it would be dozens of billions of rubles if we're lucky enough annually. Yes, per annum. Thank you so much. I have another question. To what extent this practice can be extrapolated or rolled out to cover other industries? For instance, we have a lot of other taxpayers, big taxpayers. The companies which are headquartered in Russia but work internationally, probably they also will have to pay more taxes in other countries. What do you think? By the way, I think that probably Pascal will add something to that. Well, Pascal in his presentation said that Pillar 1, just like Pillar 2, is not just about digital companies. The scope of its application has already been expanded to all the companies with a turnover of more than 20 billion. And in essence, we welcome equality in taxation. If Russia eventually has a company with a turnover of more than 20 billion euro per annum, and if it doesn't work in the extraction industry or digital, it would be quite fair if it has to pay the same tax internationally as other international stakeholders. So we stand up for the equality in taxation. We do believe that this is quite fair. Thank you so much. Pascal?
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I mentioned during my presentation that extractive is out. And extractive will be out because the logic of sharing part of the rent doesn't fit extractive. The rent of extractive, there is a consensus among economists, belongs to the place where it's extracted. So there is no risk there. Our understanding, to echo what Alexei has said, is that Russia will actually benefit from Pillar 1, and there is no Russian company to be in scope of Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is slightly different, because on Pillar 2, the threshold is not 20 billion euros of turnover, but 750 million of turnover. So there are definitely Russian companies in the scope of Pillar 2, but all the companies in the world will face the same level of taxation. There is no carve-out for Pillar 2, and except one carve-out which is pure shipping. But all the rest will be in the scope, which also levels the playing field. And I very much appreciate what Alexei has said about fairness, about the fact that if a company is in scope, so be it. What we need is a level playing field, that all countries play by the rules. Pillar 1 is about reallocating 100 billion euros. There will be no additional tax of Pillar 1. It's just a different way of sharing the tax. And Pillar 2, indeed, increase the tax base and the tax revenue worldwide. Our estimate is that it will be above 100 billion euros of additional revenue annually, globally.
Thank you. Я думаю, что...
Well, I think that in terms of taxation, we'll not do without the Federal Tax Authority. And I do believe that the Federal Tax Service will contribute dramatically to this topic. Therefore, I will pass the floor to the head of the Federal Tax Service, Daniel Yegorov. Tell us, please, about your vision. Probably it is different from what's been said. Well, thank you so much. You know, I remember the discussions of 10 years ago when we started raising the questions of international taxation. We had quite heated discussion at that time, and it's very difficult emotionally to look at that, revisiting of that problem, and it's very difficult not to fall into the temptation to say, I warned you. It's very difficult to listen to the common sense. But getting back to what we are approaching at the moment, if we look at the difficult questions which may arise concerning how the global taxation changes, and how the global taxation now comes into the shape, it would be very difficult to avoid a kind of a trap, which Coach Alexei will have to make reference to Pascal every now and then, so Pascal, please be patient. First thing which happens, we all had university background, and we were told by our professors that taxation, this is a part of the country's sovereignty, and this is another part and parcel of the country's integrity, like the army or anything like that. And now we are saying that taxation is being developed at the supranational level. The way I imagined sovereignty for me in the area of taxation is being eroded, is changed. But for instance, the countries with excise regimen around Russia are creating some dirty taxation flows, and therefore we have to tighten our regimen. As for the Pillar 1 measures, for me, even in terms of the use of these mechanisms, I meant Pillar 2 actually. This was slip of my tongue. So Pillar 2 is more interesting for us because this is about setting up a new international tax neutrality. In terms of tax administration, neutrality, this is where you don't have an option, where you don't have a choice. Neutrality is when you don't actually have to contemplate whether you can move to another status, another regimen, or another tax rate. And this eases very much our life, the life of the tax administration. This is what we have to admit. The second question which arises, this is about the following. This neutrality, who will it benefit? Because the rules which are going to be set up, you understand that the problems of the institutions which are being set up by Pascal's group, bear in mind that the main principle of what is being set up, this is the scale of the world. You don't have a chance to hold an experiment. You have no opportunity to try and test what may come out of that. Certainly, there are some problems. This is a problem. But there is no answer. What is the best way to do that in order to understand what it may result in? And you can treat very seriously to the risks which we are ready to take.
I'm not trying to criticize, but to give you food for thought. Just imagine we have the decision-making center. We have the great French philosophers have taught us how to divide authorities, divide governmental agencies, how to balance, checks and balances. Some are coming up with the legislation, others are executing legislation, and yet others, based on the principles which have been offered by society, they're monitoring the implementation. Will we be able, like if we have international taxation system, will we be able to make this kind of division of, powers? I do not know. So far, what I'm seeing is that we have the very concentrated point of a decision-making, how this legislation will be balanced, also to make sure that we, identify interest of all the stakeholders in this game. It's a very big question. Moreover, it may lead us to some place we do not want to be. Like if we have the court ruling, court decision, and now you have to change your whole legislation after a certain court ruling. Where can we find these balances, be it on the governmental level, be it on the international law level? You cannot put everything into one point. Probably it is not going to be long-lived like that. We probably have to find some balances. It's a very important thing. It's the first part. And is that it? Probably not. We do understand that the antithesis of neutrality would be the stimulating function of taxation. Yes, of course. Any stabilization. It is when rules of those who are better prepared are they get better advantage. If you are not ready for this new legislation, you are being sort of kind of put into this situation. There is not much you can do. If well-developed economies are pretty stable, then if you try to attract some manufacturing compared to these other developed countries, it will be harder for them. And now OECD is having discussions about it. Okay, guys, how can we attract manufacturing? It looks like we're all on the equal footing. It's equal rate. In theory of taxation, you can have some subsidies. Which of those benefits will be harmful and which will not be harmful? Who is to say that we should not attract manufacturing? It's fair, it's just, because again, the basis of any taxation will be the modern understanding of justice and fairness. It's also a big question, because technologically speaking, if we switch to kind of administrative topic, I believe that in this point of time, it is a little bit less important as a topic, but still we should not forget about it, because as a matter of fact, now we have the new birth of principles. New principles are coming forth. This is the main pillars, and of course the technologies will be adjusting to these new pillars. But speaking about administration of taxation, we have tons of questions, and one of the most important questions, which Pascal and I have been discussing, it is supranational institutions in which we as countries can collect these elements of administration, like a Lego elements of administration, because each of us, it's an absolutely right statement. If you have a global challenge and global corporations, we have the response in the form of global taxation, right? But then I would also add, as administration, we also have the global administration, or we should have a global administration. We cannot escape it, right? And if we have a global administration, then we have to look and what is our shape, what is our situation, and what kind of principles will be laid into foundation as a country to be able to do adequate global administration, not with the political, statements, but according to the needs of the global administration today. It's a totally different level of cooperation. Are we going to chase every international corporations and trying to calculate proportions and proportional revenue? We are at the very nascent stage, at the very first stage, when we simply try to understand how this tax base, like Pascal was speaking about this market, how are we going to identify this tax base? Even the VAT tax for the electronic services, value-added tax. Let's be serious. We know that today it's a huge element of trust to corporations, that corporations are providing the right proportion, providing the right information. It is not that they're bad guys, but the rules have not been stabilized, and technologically we haven't solved many issues yet. It's something to look forward to. And like Pascal was saying, and Alexei was saying, we first began with digital companies. And when we understood, how do you make this border between digital and non-digital? Any oil company is now a pretty digital company or digitalizing company. And the next question is, how can we create proportions not in the B2C segment where we have a lot of problems, but how do we make proportions when we allocate a certain, country in the B2B segment? It's much more complex, much more complicated process. And so, as soon as we will make up our mind, we will identify what will be the foundational principles. It's a very difficult work. It's a very complex work for the future. And I believe it's quite normal if we understand that if things are moving back and forth between jurisdictions, maybe I'll be cynical in my statement. Neither us nor anyone else is going to stop this kind of movement of assets and money between the countries. So we have to understand what is our budget, what is our stakeholders, what is our tax administration in Russia. We have to gather together and to understand who is going to lose, who is going to win, so that we have our position. Like, yes, we'll be listened to, we will be helped, so that together we give birth to this kind of international taxation. Thank you. Daniel, thank you. And I'm a dilettante, I'm not a professional, but what you're saying, administration, I guess this kind of some kind of basically forcing mechanisms and kind of provision. And I guess the member countries will have to coordinate their actions to make sure that all of them work based on some unified principles. So I would like to ask this question to you. You have been saying that we will be heard and we will be helped. How it is organized at the moment? I mean the cooperation as a certain platform, as a certain instrument. Are you guys communicating in ongoing mode, or are you just responding to some inquiries? Are you being proactive, reactive, and how it is working? Well, I have to say that we have the representatives of the Russian Ministry of Finance and us, Russian Tax Service. Yes, we need coordination. We have the task forces where we also work, and Pascal is also with us today, and he is basically managing this whole process in terms of organizing it. Yes, we have basically weekly communication between the Pascal's organization and ours. And in terms of openness and transparency, our colleagues have provided the maximum capabilities and opportunities.
Are you taking this not just from Russia, but if you are the think tank, like Decision Maker Center, how you cope with this whole work stream coming from the countries involved in this process, how you implement if there is any conflict of interest, so how that works? Can you give us some details?
I mean, more than a think tank, we are a do tank, so we do stuff, right? More than thinking it through. So what we do, and Daniel has expressed it, is that we do organize the flows of information. And that's fascinating. Daniel started with the concept of sovereignty. It is true that what we're doing is supranational, but it is to strengthen national sovereignties. So we're not trying to put in place a global federal tax. We are just trying to enable tax administrations to do their job, which is to collect the taxes voted by the national parliament. So it's something which is an international move to support national taxation. I think it's very important. So you don't have something like a global harmonization. And we do organize the flows of information. That is the case for the end of bank secrecy. There are almost 100 million bank accounts which are now exchanged from Swiss banks and other countries, right, all over the world. And we are working very closely with all the tax administrations, in particular through the Forum on Tax Administration, Daniel Yegorov is a very active member of, to ensure that we will have the mechanism to allow tax administration to better share the information, to have access to the information of the companies which are in scope, not to be intrusive, but to have a cooperative compliance mechanism, to have an advanced mechanism to provide certainty to the companies. So it's a win-win with the companies. And I don't see conflicts of interest here also. I'd rather see a mechanism where we have a better flow of information. I mean, our society is based on information and based on data. I can see, I mean, fantastic changes in the Russian tax administration and beyond. I think your Prime Minister is extremely active in making sure that there is a proper use of data. So this data is key and is a common value between companies and tax administration to provide certainty and to provide a better administration. So I think it has to be win-win. I understand there can be some reluctance from taxpayers or questions, but at the end of the day, it has to be a win-win.
Thank you. In one of your interviews, you mentioned India like one of the countries who are going to benefit from the Pillar 1. And who are the other ones? I mean, is Russia among the main beneficiaries?
On Pillar 1, if you're a market economy, and if you import digital services but other services, and if you don't have companies in scope, yes, you're a winner. Now, you will be a winner to the extent of the size of your economy, and Russia is a significant economy. So the win is not small. If you're a very small developing country, the percentage of the share you will get is small. But compared to your own economy, that's something which is still significant. So yes, I think I can say without any doubt that Russia will benefit from Pillar 1 in terms of revenue.
Thank you. Алексей, может быть, вы что-то...
Alexei, do you mind to add something about the mechanisms of cooperation or those proposals which may be forwarded to this kind of platform? Yes, we have been the part of the 3 task forces along with the Russian tax authority. We work under the OECD organization, and I guess the best and brightest minds have been working in these task forces. We have very fruitful cooperation between them. We have been heard, we come up with different proposals, and we are going to continue to do this and going to deepen and widen this cooperation. And many issues have been resolved in the last several days, and we have much better understanding of how the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 relate to one another. And so the process is ongoing. We are moving forward, and we have been very proactive players. As for Russia internal affairs due to this process, what will have to be changed possibly in the Russian legislation? Maybe some rules of the game which have to be adapted from the Russian side. It's a question for you and for Daniel. Speaking about Pillar 1, it's going to be supranational international legislation developed on the OECD platform. In those countries which will be the member state having joined it, they will form international convention. As for the Pillar 2, a model for changes of the taxation administration will be developed for those countries which will want to implement it into the national legislation. Based on these model changes, each country will take certain liabilities, speaking about the minimum tax rate, to make it a part of legislation in certain time periods, and this kind of model rules which will be developed on the OECD, I mean. And the second part of the Pillar 2, about the minimum tax rate of the tax source. There'll be a model changes which will be made made into the standards of the double tax treaties. And based on this standard, which assumes the minimal level of the tax source for the passive incomes, each country within the bilateral agreements will be introducing changes to its double tax treaties. So we're hoping that our colleagues from the OECD will help us to implement in their double tax treaties. So if there'll be a certain blacklist of the non-working jurisdictions which will not be a part of it, because without a certain, stick and carrot, you have to have a stick, right, by international community, because those low tax jurisdictions, they also have to be made to make changes about the double tax treaties. Without some enforcement mechanism, they will not be happy to change their national legislation. So we're looking forward to our colleagues from the OECD. Daniel, are you going to add anything to that? Well, as for introducing the legislation, probably not. Pillar 1, I would like to make a remark whether Russia will win or not win. As it was mentioned, again, it's a market, right? If we are going to develop, those countries will be the winners, those who have the biggest consumption market. Okay, let's talk openly about it, right? If a state, if a country has a desire and capabilities to develop their consumption market, due to that, they're going to get more revenues, right? If you have less market, you have less tax revenue. It's very simple. And we've heard many viewpoints and many statements of people who are responsible for the public finances and for international finances. But how about the business community? It looks like we have made decisions for the business community without involving the business community. Alexander Yershov, Editor-in-Chief, Commonly Markets, Thomson Reuters. What is your perspective? We've been speaking about some constructive relation. Well, Alexander Shokhin is speaking. We've been discussing these issues, but the business community is listening to us, and the Russian government as well does. But what we care about is not only to carry across our ideas, but also to achieve some balance of interests. Pascal has mentioned that 99% 99 and 99 entrepreneurs would be against hiking taxes. Usually this argument is used not to discuss different tax changes with the business community. When in October of the last year, at our rally of our chamber, we've complained to the Russian president that this initiative of the additional rent factor for the mineral extract taxes would be adopted without public discussion. Basically, we were looking at the draft bill. You know, and somebody told me, what's the point of discussing it with you if you'll be against? We know that you will be against. Sometimes this logic prevails. And even speaking about this kind of rental markup factor, we were able to achieve some agreement with the Russian Ministry of Finances and the Russian government. So I hope that knowing that the business community does not want to pay more taxes, it's a given. Still, whenever we do any tax innovations, we can find some optimal solutions which will preserve the stimulating function of the taxes and also provide revenues, tax revenues for the budget. And hopefully, the main guidelines of the budgetary policy and tax policies and other documents which are being finalized right now, and very soon it will be introduced in the draft budget of the Russian Federation. Again, we have some public platforms to discuss this. And I remember that some time ago we had been discussing these documents as a public discussion, speaking about the early draft of the Russian budget. Now, unfortunately, we do not have such a capability. Well, it's just a general statement. It applies not only to the topics we have been discussing, but also about the novelties into the Russian tax legislation. As for those pillars, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, it's obvious that these principles have been approved and agreed upon. I remember when we had other terminology, not Pillar 1, Pillar 2, but BEPS was very popular. BEPS on the level of G20. It was clear back then that we were going to arrive some rules of the game, and the fact that now what Pascal has been sharing, that what OECD is developing right now is basically implementation of those principles which had been outlined by the G20 heads of state some time ago. So now we're speaking about technology of implementation, not about the principles, but about technology of implementing those earlier principles. And as Daniil Yegorov pointed out, it's about minimizing risks which may occur. They could be technological risks, they could be risks related to our understanding of fairness and justice. And we are assuming that, without speaking about the Pillar 1, is related more to digital companies, but it also has to be related to digital tax administrations.
And it's very difficult to address all these technological issues. It's rather difficult to minimize the risks related to that. Our tax service is probably most digitalized in the world. The level of digitalization is above anything else than in many countries or other ministries. This is not by accident that sometimes the tax service exports its financial services to other countries. The risk actually is not minimum, but first of all, we recognize and identify these risks, and there are digital tools which may minimize these risks further. We proceed from the fact that this is totally inevitable. Therefore, we have to discuss rather some technological things and technological solutions. As for Pillar 2 is concerned, what is important is to bring the work on revisiting the double taxation agreement to an end. Mr. Mishustin said that there are still several jurisdictions which we have to fight against, and there are two tracks. One is about re-signing an agreement with Cyprus, Malta, and secondly, we have to denounce this agreement with the Netherlands. Unfortunately, us, the business or the Ministry of Finance, failed to convince the Netherlands to sign again, to prolong this agreement. But the finance ministry publicly said that certain preferences for the companies that really invest and the ones which are registered in the Netherlands would be retained. Certainly the Parliament has to endorse that, but we need some transition period. As far as this is not just about the mechanism of bringing taxes down, but we're speaking about investments. And you know that many state-owned enterprises are registered in the Netherlands. For other countries, we have either to resign these agreements, prolong them, or we have to think about retaining and supporting the companies which invested heavily and which are incorporated in these countries. So it means that we have to think about bringing about those two mechanisms, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and the Russian business is ready for cooperation. Let me stress once again, we need certainty in what industry, what taxes the companies are going to pay. And besides, this concerns the second part of our discussion, the cross-border mechanisms and taxation. Well, the national taxation should not be just opposed on the international, supranational taxation, so that we don't have a new meaning of the double taxation. But again, we'd like to discuss these taxation issues with all the stakeholders, including the OECD. Daniel spoke about the decision-making. The OECD is developing these technologies. But the OECD, this is a club of the elites. This is the global elite, and in some sense it imposes its decisions. But WTO, for instance, has the dispute resolution body, which is being blocked and frozen by the Americans. But in essence, there are some mechanisms helping to address such disputes. What about the OECD? Does it have such mechanisms to address the disputes or not? And the non-OECD members, will they have the right to vote, or they will have just to comply with the rules determined by the OECD? So it means that we have to develop all these mechanisms, and the first step is to actually accept Russia. We actually we applied for the membership in OECD. Pascal, please, can you help us in getting access to the OECD? I apologize. I have not introduced Alexander Shokin, but I don't think that anyone in Russia doesn't know the president of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. As far as we're speaking about business, we have to understand that just rephrasing the American saying, you actually don't have to be frank with anyone but the tax authorities. So it means that business actually has to be frank and open only to its tax consultant. Probably the tax consultants present here may tell us about some solutions, probably tipping us about what solutions are possible. What actually we may do in this new environment in which the business has to be operational. I'm passing the floor to Michael Filin from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much. In essence, we hear a lot from the business about that topic. And there are three things which we have not raised yet. The first one is quite local. Can you make sure that we are not somehow trumped by the heavy load of the administration documents, the documents which will have to be translated into several languages, and there are more fundamental things for digital companies, for instance. The data on the sales in the market is quite sensitive because this is the main value of the company. We, as a big digital company which pays more than 20 billion euro all over the world, has to ram home the information about the sales not only to each of these countries, but we have to disclose that information to the rest of the world. Russia probably would like to have information about our sales not only in Russia but elsewhere, just to identify probably there's something related to Russia in these sales data. Therefore, actually, these sales data will have to be disclosed to all the tax administrations, and not all the tax authorities are as good as in Russia, and therefore it might be quite delicate. Some part of the information which is collected is not enough for taxation purposes. My client, for instance, a tax director of one of big companies, tells me that actually I'm a woman, and therefore usually I would receive targeted advertisement, and we need absolute accuracy for the taxation. We have to be tolerant to the quality of information. You will never get 100% accurate data. You will never know whether a person, a Russian citizen, and he goes to Turkey and he is using VPN in order to watch a movie, or whether this is a Turkish guy who is using some other guy's tablet in order to watch the movie. So it means that we have to ensure the accuracy of the tax data. Secondly, we like to make sure that the benefits are intact. And tax benefits certainly will boost the tax revenue. And some people ask whether the use of the Pillar 2 would abandon the 3% discount on the taxes for the digital companies. And actually questions are raised about the special administrative regions and other tax benefits. Countries certainly would like to protect themselves against the global tax order. Another philosophical idea which we hear from the business is as follows. What the countries have agreed is about the profit tax sharing among the countries. For instance, let's look at Malaysia or any other big country. It will get its share of profit tax from a big multinational company, 20% of the tax which is located in Malaysia. So the country gets 20% of that tax, but where the remaining 80% is, if we're paying taxes in that country, so it means that actually everyone who works in that country has to share this revenue. So all the multinational companies let you pay this money to everyone operational in that country in order to boost the economy of that country. Along with that, we have a simultaneous tax story, redistribution of profitability of the global companies in particular. When we speak about digital companies, the user-generated content is quite important. For instance, the internet video aggregators are popular not because actually they do exist, but because there are people who are shooting videos and who are publishing their videos there. The distribution of margins for the benefit of the market will eventually come true, and the rewards who are making that content would be paid differently, but eventually these two flows, these two processes would merge. Whether it happens in 20 years or tomorrow, it depends. So these are the three things which we hear from the business. Thank you so much. But in essence, business is treating these processes a constructive way or not? Well, this is an objective reality, and business has to cooperate with the tax administration. And business has to spell out what it can do and what it cannot do. So the administration of these processes has to be very efficient and very realistic. That would be just great, and that would be very important. Really, we don't have the right for a mistake. So this global tax would be introduced once and forever. We have to make sure that it works, and we have to listen to the business, at least in terms of administration, how it is all administered. Thank you so much. And we're proceeding with the second part of our topic. We'll speak about cross-border or carbon border adjustment mechanism, carbon taxes, the taxes which are to be imposed by the EU when supplying certain products across its border in order to achieve carbon neutrality eventually. For Russia, this is a very painful topic, although this tax will concern not all the commodities. I do believe that the most interesting thing is whether we can adapt for the current situation. Many companies differ in terms of how they supply their products, the commodities. Whether the EU is ready to take into consideration these features and peculiarities in the framework of this carbon border adjustment mechanism.
You about this carbon adjustment mechanism, and if you can focus on some specialities which might be implemented for the countries involved in supplying the cargoes to European Union, please.
Thank you. Very quickly, that's an extremely important topic. I think the next 10 years will be about carbon pricing. The past 10 years were about corporate income tax. The next 10 years will be about carbon pricing. Just 2 or 3 considerations. Today, 2/3 of carbon emissions are not priced, 0. We have objectives to have carbon neutrality, I think all the countries, by mid-century, and this will have to go through some form of carbon pricing, 1. 2, a number of countries are moving towards carbon pricing, or have already moved, and the European Union as a bloc is moving. And if you tax carbon, you need to, that's quite logical, you need to protect yourself from what we call carbon leakage. The fact that if you tax your steel industry, you don't want it to move to India and then import the steel. So you need to have a mechanism to protect you. These are the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The third element to consider is that carbon border adjustment raise serious difficulties from a trade perspective, because there can be some form of green protectionism. So there is a legitimacy and there is a risk. The fourth consideration is that not all countries yet are ready to move to explicit carbon pricing. So you have a difficulty. What we at the OECD, we are advocating is to say countries will move on their own, that's their sovereignty, but we need a forum where they can exchange. We need a forum where we take stock of the carbon price, we need to measure it, and 2, we also need to take into account what would be the equivalent in price of regulation, so other climate mitigation policies, so that we have an in-depth knowledge of explicit carbon pricing, carbon taxes, excise duties, and other taxes which directly or indirectly tax carbon, but also the implicit price, put countries together to engage in a discussion and to try to mitigate the trade risk. So we just want to be the honest broker with all countries, which is why my Secretary General, who's new in the job, Matthias Cormann, already wrote to all G20 countries and others, including Russia, to invite them to participate in another inclusive framework on carbon pricing. We think it's the big challenge of the coming years. We tend to think that there will be explicit carbon pricing. It's a matter of time, and the move will be important to limit the risk of trade disruptions. And I reiterate what I said earlier, Russia is a member of all the tax work of the OECD on an equal footing, so we hope that you will also accept our invitation to join this inclusive framework.
But any sort of this adjustment mechanism would impact, naturally, would impact on competition. How are you going to ensure the fair competition in these new conditions?
That's one of the challenges. I think this competition issue is more with the WTO than anything else, but what we can do, I mean, all organizations are involved. You have the UN with the COP mechanism and making sure that countries implement their national determined contribution to reach the Paris Agreement. That's one block. Then you have the WTO if there are disputes on the border carbon adjustment. But before getting there, what we need to do is put countries together to exchange, to dialogue. That's about multilateralism. You have the Germans who have recently launched an initiative, which is a climate club in the G20. You have the G20. We had a very good tax symposium in Venice in July, and the finance minister, Mr. Sulianov, was invited. We co-organized that with the Italian presidency, so we invited Mr. Sulianov to contribute to this tax symposium. It's about getting countries together first before they enact the border carbon adjustment. Mm-hmm. And for the time being, there is a project in Europe, and we think it's going to move ahead. But we need, through the dialogue, through the measurement of implicit and explicit carbon pricing, to see how we can limit the competition risk and the trade disruption.
Thank you.
Then I would redirect that question as far as we're speaking about the competition and the opportunities for the companies in that area. I will redirect that question to Mr. Sazonov. We have to understand in advance whether this carbon tax may be painful for the Russian companies. Thank you so much. It's too premature to speak about that money-wise. First of all, we have to get some analytical data to understand the carbon footprint of the Russian exporters and actually how big it would be by 2026. It's too premature to make these estimates. We have to understand the demand elasticity on the products which are being supplied to Europe, because the carbon tax which is going to be imposed will be paid not only by the Russian exporters, but at least part of that would be paid by the European consumers. We have to proceed from the elasticity of the demand as how this tax would be shared. It's too premature to make any conclusions, to jump at the conclusions. But in essence, when speaking about the CBAM or quota trading, we have to understand that every country has its own competitive edge.
And all those who have joined the Paris Agreement, they can choose their own path of how to achieve those goals, which are the part of the Paris Agreement. The one common goal is to decrease of emissions, not to let the temperature rise more than 2 degrees Celsius. In ideal, 1.5 degrees Celsius growth of the global temperature. So EU may have its own strategy, Russia its own strategy. And the EU strategy is more or less clear. Its competitive advantage is the very strong human resources, engineering base, and quite a big density of population. And achieving these goals will be in line with their industrial policy when EU would like to get rid of the hydrocarbons imports and to improve the economic situation. Well, the Russia has its own unique advantages which we can use to achieve the same goals, which are outlined in the Paris Agreement. Our advantage is our huge territory and a very low population density in Russia. So maybe those tools which will be applied in Europe will not be fully applicable in the Russian Federation. So maybe we should trade not the emission certificates, but the certificates for planting forests or planting algae, which will be consuming GNG. We have a huge territory, a lot of seas and oceans, and this could be our competitive edge in achieving the climate Paris Agreement. It should be based on using your own competitive advantage, not only to transplant somebody else's experience. We have to understand what is the starting point and what is our competitive advantage, and then we can understand what kind of tools could be applied in Russia. As for helping Russian exporters, exporting companies, it would be senseless if the Russian government would simply subsidize this payment which they would pay to Europe. Then the goal of decreasing GNG emissions would not be achieved, and it contradicts to the Paris Agreement goals. On the other hand, we have to help Russian business to adapt. We have different regulatory tools like budgetary tools and tax tools, which would help to implement technologies to decrease our carbon footprint. But these tools, which will be used by the Russian exporters, they have to be acknowledged and adopted or adopted in Europe or in those countries where we supply the products. Russian tools may be different from the Europeans, but they should be no less effective. So our goal is, on one hand, to build domestic stimulus to decrease the footprint, and secondly, we have to keep an ongoing dialogue with the European community so that these tools which Russia will be implementing would be acknowledged by Europe. Because if we achieve the decrease of the ecological footprint by different tools, if we have the end goal is achieved, that the whole global community should acknowledge these tools and these instruments. And this should be our goal, to make sure that the Russian tools will be acknowledged by the international partners. And we have to help our exporters. Thank you. You have been saying about the natural Russian competitive advantages, including the huge territory. I wanted to ask Alexander, do you think the companies, Russian companies, should adapt to this new carbon collection by changing the markets? I mean, maybe they have to change their supplies to minimize this kind of ecological revenue or ecological tax, or maybe to optimize the structure, because we still have time until 2026. Well, much of what Alexei has been saying, I could say the same, right? Because in the Paris Agreement it is written, there is a principles, the common principle, but differentiated responsibility. Each country should find its optimal trajectory based on their competitive advantage in the economy structure. It's a trajectory of achieving the goal, which is carbon neutrality. And climate has no borders. So each country by 2050, they have to reach their targets, like 1.5 degrees, by using different methods and different ideas and tasks to achieve this common goal, which is laid out by the Paris Agreement. We have yet another competitive advantage. In Russia, it's a structure of the Russian energy complex, energy industry. We do not have as many wind farms and solar farms, but we have the nuclear energy. And by the way, this is one of the factors that Russian competitive advantage have been acknowledged. That is, we have to make sure that our partners, like if we produce the hydrogen with the nuclear energy and the wind energy, it should not be attributed far away. It should be closer to the green spectrum, and should not be attributed to the orange or the red spectrum. I mean, producing hydrogen by the nuclear power stations, because in Russia could be the big exporter of hydrogen. And of course, like you said, we can change our export routes instead of Europe to the Asian Pacific region. No, we do not provide as much coal to Europe, to think that we can get good benefits if we reorient our export. But even speaking about the coal supplies and coal shipments, there are some technologies which decrease the carbon footprint, especially when you use these classic hydrocarbons. What is important? Like Alexei Sazanov has mentioned, we have to support the Russian exporters. Well, please, you support us. Not by not introducing the new tax on exporting those products into the EU, which could be also taxed by the carbon tax or the carbon duty. Let's develop a mechanism which would stimulate investments both into green generation, into green metal processing, into green petrochemical fertilizers production. We have to find this mode, the thing, not to tax the potential dividends of the Russian oligarchs, but to channel these investments into changing our economic structure and making the economy more green. Maybe we will be more successful because the Russian president outlined a very ambitious goal to become carbon neutral even before the EU will become carbon neutral. And let's introduce some benefits, some breaks related to the climate investments and preventing the climate change. We also have to write it down in these pillars we have been discussing today. And we have to take them into account as a certain positive factor. And by the way, another important thing when we speak about that, we have to learn how to calculate carbon footprint. Thanks to the Russian government and the business community, I believe with the involvement of my economic chamber, we have achieved this kind of transitional period from 2023 to 2026. Not all industries will be under this carbon regulation. There'll be quite a lengthy transitional period, but at the stage one, we have to learn how to calculate the carbon footprint. We cannot do it today. And even our European partners do not understand now how many, how do you calculate it, how many economic transitions you have to calculate. So we have to keep moving together. Pascal, let us know that this is the mechanism which should embrace all these states, all the countries. And one of the main principles is approving this kind of July's document. Pascal has mentioned about the European Commission. We have to tie it together with different standards of the international organizations, including WTO. The main principle, and the main principle which business stands for, is that the EU carbon regulation should be compatible with the WTO standards, World Trade Organization standards. And we have to, harmonize it. Since we do not have much time, dear colleagues, I would like to give the floor to two more consulting companies to understand what is the main pain points of the business community when we speak about this cross-border adjustment. First, Mikhail Orlov from KPMG. Mikhail, what are your evaluation of risks and what would be your input into this discussion? Yes, Alexandra, I can say many things, but since we do not have much time, probably I'll have to speak within 1 minute of time. Yes, I would like to dedicate my presentation to the issues of the cross-border adjustment tax. But even for the first topic, I would like to mention, while I was listening to your discussion, it was very interesting discussion, and thanks to Pascal, especially for him joining us today at this session. I had this idea. When a major company, big company, is making an agreement about the joint pricing policy, it's used a cartel agreement. It is called cartel agreement, and sometimes you have even the criminal liability, although it makes it more transparent for a consumer. But when a government is making an agreement about the joint efforts for making new policy in the tax policy, we call it efficient tax cooperation, because we would like to get rid of the tax rivalry. Maybe I do not understand something. Well, it's great that all the countries, despite of their, irrespective of their religious convictions and political situation and their historic kind of situation, they have joined together in fighting this one big enemy, this global taxpayers, and fighting this global taxpayer. We're having big successes. Well, as for this tax, which we call cross-border carbon adjustment, I think the problem is wider, and this tax is not the main topic. But I think the climate agenda is becoming more relevant. Europeans are great. Many European companies are implementing new technologies to make sure that they reduce their carbon footprint. Thank God, it's great. And in this regard, the fact that now we have this kind of European tax emerging, I think it's a logical continuation of the European policy. On the other hand, it's pushing Russia and Russians to do something. But my question is, if we did not have this tax, does it mean that Russia would not be a part of this climate agenda? Of course not. Of course not. I think that this tax, this carbon tax, is helping us to become quick, to become more agile. As for the potential damage, for the business, it's too premature to say. KPMG has calculated this potential, so to speak, damage for the business, including this kind of 5 industries. In the annual terms, this additional tax revenue will be from 1.5 to 2 billion euro a year. 2 billion. In 10-year period, it will be 15 to 25 billion euro. It will be additional tax. You're speaking about the all industries, for 5 industries which are within the scope. Yes, it depends on whether this industry will be able to reinvent themselves, and in this remaining time to implement some new technologies. And of course, whether the government can help them to implement these new green technologies. I believe it's a two-way street. We have to combine the efforts of the business and the government, because both and the whole Russian society are interested in the climate agenda, in implementing this program to decrease the GNG emissions. I'm sorry, I will stop at this because we do not have much time in agenda. Thank you, Mikhail. And I also have a question to Marina Belyakova. She's a partner in Ernst & Young. Marina, what is your perspective? Who has to be an independent observer of this whole process? Who is going to evaluate the efficiency of this process? Well, these could be companies like yours, EY, independent auditors, or these could be more high-tech surveyors, such as AGS. I do not know. Like, who is going to be to do this kind of fine line that Alexander has mentioned? Because to be able to calculate these emissions, you have to have some big methodology, right? Well, I believe that this fine line that you've mentioned, it is not such a fine line. Actually, it's a question of certain algorithms. It's a special, separate specialization and proficiency. It doesn't matter if this will be experts or auditors. It doesn't matter how you call them, right? But what Russian Ministry of Economics is doing in terms of accreditation, this is actually the very right way to go. And most importantly, not only to have it on paper, but actually to have this mechanism like working in real life, so that we could recognize the results of the Russian, efforts. And a couple of words about the general structure. The point is that we in Russia usually have been discussing this topic like, okay, if European Union has done something, we in Russia have to react. We in Russia have to follow the EU lead. And speaking about the Russian exporters, I think by 2026 the number of industries will be growing, which will be within the scope of this new carbon legislation. And for the Russian Federation, if we want to be a part of this system, we have to understand whether it's going to be the quota trading system. And the second point, the second important point is that if it's a very big deal, it's a very serious idea, we see the regulation, it's going to be painful, right? And speaking about the practice of the Republic of Kazakhstan, if you're speaking about the quota trading systems, the quotas are cheap, right? And the business is not like a suffering. There is no effect. There is only ineffective administration. If we are to be serious about this topic, we have to look for the potential of transformation of different industries. And on a serious note, if we want to be like real serious, and it will be a painful transition, we have to motivate industries to implement new green technologies. Speaking about the carbon farms and the Russian forests and different carbon capture projects in Russia, yes, it's a very strong, part of Russia. We and other consultancies have been doing research. We're going to introduce this research about how can you monetize these projects. Despite that we do not have this regulation in Russia, we have some ongoing projects, and it's quite interesting for the oil and gas industry in Russia. But this kind of benefits, we cannot do this yet. Otherwise, we will be fully subsidizing Russian emissions. We're not going to change the technologies, but we're simply planting like more trees in Russia without changing old technologies. It is not about planting more trees. It's about having this energy transition. Unless we have energy transition, Russia will be covered with forests, but it will have outdated technologies. And in 10 years, nobody will want Russian oil or gas. And the most important thing is who is going to pay for it. Because if we speak about the big things like carbon capture and storage or hydrogen production, these are big developments. They're very expensive technological developments. For all these technologies to be operational, and we cannot assume that only business are going to take the burden, or maybe some of the consumers. It would be an impossible scenario. So we have to understand what would be this proportion of payments, and what should be the role and the volume of public financing for these initiatives, and where are these technologies which will help us to take this oil and gas Russian industry and change it or become greener as Russia, greener energy in our country. These are the goals, and this is not about the reacting to the EU measures. It is not about let's decrease export duties and to save Russian metallurgical industry, although we also have to think about this. This is the question. Unless we take these measures, quite probably in 15 or 20 years, Russia and its resources will lose international markets. That's it. It is not a hype. It's a reality. It's a reality. Marina, thank you very much. And at this note, I would like to finish up this session. I would like to thank the organizers. Thank you very much to our panelists for a very interesting conversation today. And I believe that you and I have been witnessing the birth of the new international government, at least the part of this kind of new world government, new world order, so to speak. Thank you very much indeed, and have a great day. We'll see you.